Vaughn, let me read you this from the New York Times today. On the main stage at the Republican National Convention this week, some Trump campaign trademarks have been missing. There have been no celebrations of the January 6 rioters and no talk of election mules smuggling ballots. Even references to Democrats cheating in elections are so spare they could be easy to miss. But across the street, it's a different story. There in so-called Media Row, the hive of right-wing activists galvanized by former President Trump's lies about the 2020 election was buzzing. Podcasters chatted about plans for paper ballots and hand counts. Mike Lindell, the Pillow Company founder, who is one of the most prominent promoters of conspiracy theories about election fraud, gave interviews about rigged voting machines. Republicans have largely kept this cohort on the fringes of its big primetime show, while more politically palatable messages take center stage. But it's still there, Vaughn. We had Jim Rutenberg and Nick Corsadini on, who had a great piece on Saturday morning about the efforts to prevent certification of the election in 2024, especially if it looks like Trump isn't coming out on top. Just talk about how that's been papered over this week.
And if I may, I think that the individual who received the greatest ovation last night was none other than Peter Navarro, who came straight from federal prison, straight here to Milwaukee to the stage to deliver a message that he spent 3 months in prison because he refused to comply with a congressional subpoena from the January 6th Select Committee. And the invitation to Peter Navarro to speak on this stage, and Peter Navarro told us that he was not asked to edit any of the contents of his speech, were, I think, notable because unlike the Democratic Party right now, let's be clear, this is a Republican Party, Nicole, that is not scared of its own shadow. It is not scared of who it is or who it is associated with. A few moments ago, we saw Paul Manafort here on the convention floor. Of course, Paul Manafort was pardoned in 2020 by Donald Trump after he was found guilty on federal charges of bank and tax fraud and sentenced to 7 years in prison. You also have the likes of Roger Stone here in Milwaukee. He was also pardoned by Donald Trump. You also have Rudy Giuliani here on the convention floor. You also have a number of fake electors on the convention floor. You have Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who you'll recall was the very first individual to receive a pardon on federal charges from Donald Trump here. And this is a party that understands it doesn't need Paul Ryan to win Wisconsin. It is not trying to convince John Boehner to come on this stage or the likes of John Kasich onto this stage to come and win the state of Ohio. It is comfortable with its identity and who it is here. And that is not the case for the last largely 8 years, where there was concerns about the stain that some individuals, some of these right-wing media outlets, you know, the likes of a Laura Loomer, may have on the America's view of what this party is. But over the course of 20 months now, since Donald Trump first launched his primary campaign, they have been really a Teflon. Donald Trump has not taken any political hits, and he and his campaign team understand that right now, at this point in time, that there is one party that is comfortable in its own skin and doesn't need to go and try to win over the likes of Mike Pence to win the general election. Instead, it's the Democratic Party that is concerned over its identity right now and its strength and its concern of its own shadow, Nicole.
Let me just push back curiously, not combatively. I mean, He hasn't taken any hits. Nikki Haley was humiliating him as recently as 5 weeks ago by winning 20-30% of the vote months after she'd pulled out. He was convicted and rather frantically saw the polls where he slipped among independents. And, you know, in its defense, the Democratic Party sees him for exactly as you just described him, unapologetically associating with other felons who he himself pardoned. People waving mass deportation signs. If he's so sure he doesn't need the middle, why did he push Mike Lindell off the stage?
I think two parts of that. I think, Nicole, it's a good question on the Mike Lindell front. I think, to be very fair, that's a question that I should ask. But I would say here, at the same time, I think it's notable when you have Nikki Haley take the stage here. She didn't take the stage 8 years ago at the Cleveland convention. At the time, we were having a lot of conversations about folks who were Republican elected officials who were concerned about the stain that associating with Donald Trump could have on them. But she tried to beat him. She lost, but she quickly came back up onto stage. stage. And a great many in the Republican Party, elected officials, understand the power dynamic here in 2024. And the second part of that is, look what they printed on the campaign signs here. It was mass deportations now, right? There was it's not just Stephen Miller in the background advising Donald Trump on what 2025 could look like, but it is printed on these convention signs that were held by the delegates on the floor that mass deportations now, and the crowd here chanting, send them back. It is, I think, at least at the activist and elected official level here of the heart of the Republican Party today, there is little fear about the pushback on its policies or its identities or associating with Donald Trump here, and that's a certain level of strength. As for Mike Lindell, I'll go and try to track him down, and I'll come back to you tomorrow with that answer, Nicole.
You know, Charlie, I accept all of Vaughn's reporting as the final word and as fact. And I think that they feel strong doesn't mean they are strong electorally. And I think this is where the whole frame around the process on the Democratic side is premature and could end up being wrong. It's a sign of strength that the Democrats understand that an effectively prosecuted case against all that, thinking it's good that Laura Loomer's walking around and everyone's wearing, you know, mass deportation signs in their bag and getting ready to wave them around in front of the cameras because they're unashamed, isn't the same as being unafraid of losing. If they were unafraid of losing, they wouldn't be rigging the certification process. They wouldn't be suppressing the vote in every way they have. They wouldn't be filing lawsuits to make sure that no one can drop off a 4-time signed ballot in a drop box, which is the most secure kind of ballot. So the projection of strength is central to Donald Trump's brand, but it should never be conflated with actual political strength.
Well, it also shouldn't be conflated with anything that is normal in American politics. And we've said this before, but think about where we are tonight. Think about where we are this week. I think it was Lenin who said that sometimes whole decades happen in weeks. Sometimes now it feels like whole decades are happening in days. And you know, we shouldn't look away from how bizarre it is that this convention, which is very optimistic and very cocky, is about to nominate a 2-time impeached former president who tried to overthrow the election, who incited an attack on the Capitol, who is a convicted felon, who's been found liable for rape. And yet they are all in on this. And as Vaughn has also said, they're all in on some of the most extreme elements of this agenda. You know, so I hope that people don't get distracted by the show here or think that, oh, tonight Donald Trump became presidential, because he's still the same guy. And this party may be feeling the wind at its back right now, and there's some reason for that. But also, we need to focus on what are you actually saying. And I'm glad he mentioned the mass deportation, because you know, before anyone says we have a new tone or they're moderating it or this was a different Donald Trump, Donald Trump has told us who and what he is many times over the last few years. And one of the things that this convention is absolutely committed to doing is the forcible deportation of maybe 10 to 20 million migrants. Now, that would be one of the great humanitarian, I think, crises of our time. And they haven't explained how they're going to do that. Deploying the military, rounding people up, demanding their papers, separating families, putting them in mass detention camps, putting hundreds of thousands of people in boxcars. And so while the Republicans are celebrating how great this moment is, these questions are still hanging over them, as is how totally strange it is for a party of law and order to be embracing one convicted felon after another. So again, you know, as we talk about this, let's not get distracted by this political moment or this political poll or the mood of the people who are here and forget what the stakes are for the rest of us.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.